I'm the Bunnyman.
And I'm Crazy Susie.
And we are in the Eyes of Terror.
We're coming back to you with the 13 Nights of October, and we are on number 13. And we kept the most boring one for last.
You say boring. I think it's interesting.
I only say that because I almost fell asleep during watching it.
Yeah.
The music was very soothing, I'll just say that.
Okay. This is one movie that everybody has probably seen bits and pieces of, but just doesn't know what it is.
Some people pronounce it Haxan, but the proper pronunciation is Haxan, and it can be called The Witch or Witchcraft Through the Ages. It is a Swedish-Danish documentary silent-style horror film. It was originally produced in 1922.
Yes.
It is a documentary fantasy horror film. I don't really find it very scary, but I guess back then they found it frightening. And it was originally produced in 1991, I think. Yeah.
Produced?
No, originally it came to the United States in 1991. Because originally it was not allowed in the U.S. It was not allowed.
I think it was on like an international ban list, to be honest.
Yeah. The writer and director is Benjamin Christensen. The film was partly based on his study of Malleus.
The Malleus Malefication?
Yeah, Malefication illness.
Do you know what that is?
Which could have led to the hysteria of the witch hunts. No, why don't you explain?
The Malleus Malefication is actually called the Witch's Bible. It's what to look for and how to torture witches. I actually own a copy.
Why am I not surprised?
Because I'm weird like that. It was used during the 1488 witch hunts in Europe. All this is is the witch hunts of Europe. Here in the United States, we had our own witch hunt, which was Salem, in Salem, Massachusetts. It was a joke compared to what actually happened in Europe.
Right. So the film was the most expensive Scandinavian silent film ever made due to the long production period and the meticulous recreation of the medieval scenes. The film won acclaims in Denmark and Sweden, but was banned in the United States due to the graphic depictions of torture, nudity, and sexual perversion. It is considered Christensen's finest work. IMDb gave it a 7.7 out of 10. We actually watched it on YouTube. And there is an uncut version available. The cast members are as follows. Benjamin Christensen actually plays the devil in the film. Ellen LaCour plays the sorceress Karna. I'll let you read the rest of them because I know I'm going to jack them up.
Well, I mean, this is Swedish. We are Americans.
That's the next one.
Emmy Schoenfield as Karna's assistant. Kate Fabian as the old maid.
Fabian.
Oscar Stribolt as the fat monk. Wilhelmine Hankerson as a Pelowin. Astrid Holm as Anna. Elizabeth Christensen as Anna's mother. Karen Winter as Anna's sister. Marion Peterson as the witch. Johannes Anderson as Peter Henrik Witch Judge. Eloth Pio as Johannes Witch Judge. Ag Hertel as Witch Judge. Ib Schoenberg as Witch Judge. Holst Johansberg as Peter Tita in Denmark called Ole Kinghole. Clara, that's a name. Pontoppidan? Sister Cecilia.
Pontoppidan.
Sister Cecilia, nun. Elsa Vermehern, Flagellant, nun.
Okay, I think we're done with that.
Okay, or we'll just do it the way that I learned off Sesame Street. Or, it's not Sesame Street, what was it? Muppets. We'll just talk it in the national tongue of Sweden. George.
That's insulting. We're not going to do it that way. It's a silent film. I don't remember anybody being announced as judge or nun or any of that anyway, so the names are not that important.
Okay.
The information is online if you would like to look it up yourself.
So there's an interesting history to this, isn't there?
There is. So from 1919 to 1921 was when Christensen actually wrote this work. And there was an idea about how the heaven and earth were how they were set up. And this is mentioned in the very first part of the film. They actually do a diagram.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how the earth is round and it's in layers, and how the atmosphere is outside the earth, and heaven is
on the ninth circle,
outside the outermost circle of earth.
Yeah, it's like, I think there's nine circles of earth,
of Earth's atmosphere, right?
Yeah, and then, well, I mean, within that, it's like our entire. It's the old, like, I think the Greeks used to believe this, that each planet, it was its own sphere.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to that old sphere thing, that within that sphere is our stars, our atmosphere, our moon, and each planet therefore has its own sphere.
Yeah.
So.
And then after that last sphere is heaven, and there's 12 choirs of angels that surround that last sphere, and I was like, okay. And in the core of the earth is hell. That's what it said. Witches were thought to have signed an unlawful pact with the devil, so they were burned at the stake.
And the whole concept of burning at the stake was, and this is in the modification, is that the idea of burning at the stake was, if you burn somebody at the stake, you're purifying them.
Yeah, I'd say they do it.
And so therefore, after they're done burning, they're acceptable to go to heaven instead of hell. So in the long run, they're thinking that you're saving them, that they're saving them.
So there are different things they believed. There are different practices that witches did. They could curse people with disease. Witches would craft ointments to help themselves to fly. On the Sabbath, corpses were fixed for their meals to dine upon during the Sabbath. They would dance with the devil, witches would. To show respect, they had to kiss the devil's buttocks. Yep. They would get in line and stand in line to wait their turn to press their lips against his cheeks.
So I wonder if this is sort of like the origins of butt kisser.
I don't know.
You know, where you're showing your loyalty by kissing somebody's butt. You know, like, it's usually a derogatory thing in our society to say that, but it could be that they're really loyal to that one person. It's just sort of a weird
And
thing.
on the celebration of the Sabbath, they would party all night and they would go home at the crow of the cock, or, you know, when the rooster crowed in the morning. At sunrise, basically.
So this is split up into 7 different scenes.
7 different chapters. So chapter 1 talked about what I just said. It talked about the idea, the concept of heaven and earth and where those things are located, and about the witches' pact with the devil and what witches were capable of.
Yes. So to some people, this, I think, would be hard to imagine. Like, what do you mean that they could... And it had to be a corpse on the gallows. It had to be somebody that was hung, who was a bad person. or was accused of something, such as thieves and stuff like that.
Right.
And at this time, because it's all set in 1488, or year of our Lord, 1488, and people being on the gallows at this time, public execution was a very common thing all across Europe. It was the idea was it would deter other people from doing it, and actually there would be, on hanging days, there would be like parties, like it was a free event. Everybody would come. People would have picnics, and like it'd be a community get together. You watch somebody get hanged, you go out and have yourself a nice little pint. And this was continued into like the 1800s, like to the Napoleonic era. This public execution and like in England and stuff, they were still having public executions up to the Napoleonic era. So that's sort of an interesting historical note.
Wow.
So I guess one woman failed though because she got a very old hand.
That wasn't in chapter 1.
I thought that was in chapter 1.
No.
Okay.
So chapter 2. I felt it was very hard to follow, so I don't have a lot of notes. I remember there was a lady and a monk, and she wanted to have a relationship with the monk, so she kept going to this witch to get all these different potions, and that's where it talked about the finger that wasn't very fresh.
Yeah.
Because the witch needed a fresh finger to go in her potion.
Well, yeah, because no, she was also getting ready for the Sabbath. So
the Sabbath was in the first
No. All this intertwines with the Sabbath. Okay, so they're not separate stories. They're all intertwining. It's just it was a very...
In chapter 2, two guys steal a dead body for the witch.
Okay, so but in the first one, in the second chapter, this chick was infatuated with this fat, gluttonous monk.
Yeah. She wanted him all to herself, and she kept going to this witch and asking for potion after potion.
Yeah, like it had to be
give to him.
It'd be stronger, and then but at the same time, she was trying to convert her and him to coming to the Sabbath. That's why it was tying in, and she was getting ready for that. She was like, "Here, smell my ointment. You too. This is the strongest one. This is the strongest one I have. But the thing is you take this. You have to apply the ointment. You have to come to this location with me. But I want you both to come to this location because he'll follow you wherever. And imagine you could be up in the air, kissing away passionately." So she was trying to draw her in to coming in with Satan, with her, and to become part of the coven.
Right.
So, and then the biggest thing he took out about it is don't make fat men run.
She was trying to play hard to get, and this poor monk had not missed any meals. And
actually, I think he came up with several other ones in between the meals.
And she was making him run through the woods and everything. And I was like, what's she going to do? Give the poor guy a heart attack before she lets him get a hold of her? I'm like, daggum, she ain't going to have no monk left by the time she makes him keel over dead.
Yeah.
She needs to give it up. Poor guy.
Yeah. And so that's the end of chapter. And all of them at the end said, to be continued. That was sort of annoying.
To be continued, and then it was the next chapter. Okay.
Yeah.
So chapter 3 is witch trials and tests.
Yeah. So
a lady's husband was sick. She believed he was cursed by a witch. She offered her poor maid a meal and became suspicious because of how she ate. She ate double-fisted, meaning she stuck one hand in the bowl and shoved the food in her mouth, and then stuck the other hand in the bowl and shoved that. She just kept double-fisting her food like she was starving.
Well, and the maid also said, "Oh, she has the evil eyes." And she also hires this guy, some homeless guy, I guess. He has the typical hobo stick bag thing, and they're waving, what was it, lead, like, so it goes back. He must have been an alchemist, and there's a lot of like different things, but in alchemy, lead is aligned to Jupiter, and I guess he called upon Jupiter and the lead to tell if the man was poisoned by a witch, was cursed, and then he puts like
A ladle of lead. He waves it over his body, and then he dumps it into a bucket of water. And he pulls it out and looks at the shape that it makes, and he's like, "Oh yeah, he's cursed by a witch."
Yeah,
No doubt about that. See, look at it.
it's written right here. You know,
We're like, sure, that makes total sense.
and then that's when she calls in the maid, and she's eating really gross like, and
So she calls the monks, and they come to the house, and they capture the woman and take her back to the church, and they strip her down and put, prisoner clothes on her and chain her up and torture her until she confesses. Well, what she confesses, now we're into chapter 4, basically. What she confesses is that she went to the Sabbath party, and her mistress was there. And so was her mistress's sister.
yeah, and it does in one of the place cards.
And she saw her mistress poop in a bucket and sling it at the
Door.
door of like the preacher or whatever.
Yeah.
The I don't remember, not the monk's door, but the congregant's door or whatever, and she saw her mistress kiss the devil's backside and all this, and the monks are like, "Well, crap, what do we do now?"
Well,
She gave up the names of like 10 people.
yeah, that's what it says in the place cards. It says for every one witch, 10 would follow.
Right, for every one witch that was captured, 10 would follow.
Yeah.
10 would follow, yeah.
But between sort of like each chapter, it would go into the malice malfabrication and have illustrations of what was, different punishments and stuff like that, or different explanations. Like at the beginning, I think the first like 15 minutes was illustrations of demons and God and stuff like that, and explaining the different lore of like Egyptians and like what they used to believe in, and that's really interesting for historical purposes. And then it would go into like some of the punishments between each one, and the punishment for this one was, it was talking about the witches drowning, and I always thought this was interesting, this concept. So they would row a suspected witch out into the middle of like a lake or a river, and this is also in Sweden, so it's got to be cold, just a bit cold, and they don't have a wetsuit on, so they chuck the suspected witch into the river, into the stream or river or lake or ocean or whatever, and if the witch floats, it's a witch, so you have to burn her at the stake. If she drowns, well, she's good. She's okay, and you pray and that her soul goes to God.
It's messed up.
And a lot of times they would actually weight them down too. Like they would tie like a log or some lead weights around their waist. So
these chapters are very short. So now we're into chapter 5, and that talks about the witchcraft era, which, like Bunnyman said, a witch gives 10 away for each. When they get, basically, when somebody tells that they're a witch, they give 10 other witches up. And if you were to oppose the capture of a witch, you yourself were deemed to be a witch.
yeah.
And a witch comes into the monastery and tempts a monk. They lock her up. One of the monks promised to free her and her baby if she shows him how she can conjure up thunder. So he brings in this great big pail of water, and he tells her.
Well, it wasn't. I mean, but this guy had a history. So they're inquisitors. It's a selected group,
Right.
and how it used to work. There was a selected group appointed by the Vatican of both priests and monks, and they were the Inquisition. Mm-hmm. Their whole job was to make sure there's a roving band of them, and they went from town to town to find as many witches as they could and kill them. And bring everybody back underneath the cloth of God, and everybody's going to be saved. But the Inquisition didn't stop at the townsfolk. It was actually in their own ranks. So this one guy points out, he has unclean thoughts of this girl. Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, main monk man is like, well, we got to purify you. So what he does is grab him and goes, strip. And he grabs a whip. And he's like, bend over, basically. And he just goes to town on this guy to purify him. Mm-hmm. And he's just whipping his back, and the guy is just, And then after that whole happens, he goes after the chick he had dirty thoughts about because he assumed that she's a witch. Because why would a monk who has a vow of chastity have dirty thoughts about a young maiden?
Right.
So he goes and he's like, all right. He tortures her, and then they sort of show different torture devices throughout. Like the rack,
right,
thumb screws, things like that, and that was really interesting. But he pulls out this pail of water. This is where you were at, and he's like, "All right," because the chick is just like crying, but they're like, "Well, no." Before that, they're like, what they accused her of witchcraft is because she couldn't feel anything in her back. They scraped her and they stuff like that, and they poked and prodded her, and she couldn't feel anything on her back. And so that's a surefire way that you're a witch if you don't feel being poked and prodded on your back, because the devil leaves his mark on you by warts and stuff like that, and without, and sort of give you weird. It's an invincibility concept, like he numbs certain areas. So that's how. So a lot of times they would take a retractable blade and poke you with that, and then pop the blade, and it would go into you, but you wouldn't bleed because of the way that the blade was designed. Mm-hmm. So that's a surefire way that you were a witch. They would poke at the with a long needle. Poke at the wart or whatever, and if it didn't bleed, you're a witch. If you didn't feel certain things, you're a witch, and stuff like that.
So basically, you were going to be a witch no matter what they did.
Yeah, and if you could not cry on demand, this is how the chick got into prison. If you could not cry on demand, you were a witch. So head monk guy is just like going to town on her, like, just, show me how to create lightning or thunder from this water. And she's like, I can't do that. And I think she just finally gives up. It's like, okay, I'll show you. And so big head inquisitor is watching from the window, and the other monk that was previously got whipped was watching from like a side window. And he pointed out, he's like, she's crying. She can't be a witch. And the guy, the head inquisitor, is like, you're so dumb. You don't realize that witches spittle on themselves to make them look like they're crying. So she's obviously used spittle to make herself look like she's crying. So it was one of those cases of... And, I mean, he was trying to bait her into, like, look, if you do this one thing for me, I won't kill you. You won't be burnt. We'll just leave. Nothing will be said. You'll live. he was trying to bait her the entire time
Right.
as they were packing up and leaving.
Yeah, saying, I'll let you leave, I'll let you have the baby and leave, and
Yeah.
nothing will happen. Yeah.
So at this time, it was, damned if you do, damned if you don't type thing. And, yeah.
So in chapter 6, they talk about many women were burned for claiming they bewitched a marriage by tying knots
Yes.
in rope.
So, if a woman had a miscarriage, it's obviously a combination of tying ropes and metal crosses thrown underneath the bed for a woman to have a miscarriage. It had to be a witch. Mm-hmm. And then it proceeded to say that no woman is safe. And it had it was no woman was safe. And then it showed a coven, a nunnery. And this one woman, she sort of went psycho and cut up a Eucharist, and she took the baby Jesus and went to the priest, the head inquisitor, because I guess the Inquisition was there, and she was like, I don't know what I'm doing, I can't help myself, and she spits on the baby Jesus, and the nunnery goes bloody insane. Everybody's freaking out. They're saying, oh, the devil's here. And you see some of the nuns punishing themselves by using belts with spikes in them. So when they breathe, it would pierce it would cut them, and they would bring them back away from temptation and all this other stuff. And you see really how psychotic the witch hunts were throughout this time. And then it even proceeds into chapter 7.
And what happened there? Because I didn't write anything down.
Okay, but up to this point, there's a lot of little things that were going on. Like there's a dream of this old lady. She died, and she went to this castle, and she was a servant of the devil. And she woke up with money on her face, and she was trying to get the money all together. And
Didn't she grab a whole bunch of it and put it in a pile or a different pile? It was all in one location, or it was scattered everywhere.
Yeah, it was scattered everywhere.
And there was an ottoman or something.
Yeah.
And so she grabbed a bunch of it and put it on there to pile it all up.
Uh-huh.
And then when she went to come back to the pile, it vanished.
Yeah, it started going off to other parts of the castle. She was chasing it, and then the devil comes, and that's that scene. So chapter 7.
That's what I'm saying. It didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, and I'll get to that at the end of the. So chapter 7 is into what would be modern 1922. I'm assuming the time of the release, and he was going through the witch hunts. Are over, with 8 million men and women and children dead. So that was the body count. At the end of that, it was 8 million men, women, and children. But it was also saying that basically the witch hunts are what we consider modern day hysteria. And it was going through this one woman who was stealing stuff and lighting things on fire. She had a fear of fire, but she would wake up in the middle of the night, light matches, and try to burn down her house or something. Yeah, and then it was pointing out when they poked and prodded these women in the back, they didn't feel anything, so it had to be hysteria, and the only thing for hysteria is to lock them up in a mental asylum. So that was the medical treatment. So everything could be just explained by hysteria, what they considered hysteria at the time. And so, all right. So there's a lot going on in this movie. And there's a lot of really interesting, stuff. They use claymation in this.
Really?
Yeah. The coins trailing off and stuff like that. I don't know how they did that with that, I don't know.
The devil character, every time you see him, his tongue is like flapping around like he's about ready to just lick people, and I found that creepy. When he bends over and has people kissing his rear end, it looked like some of the people like kissed him right in the crack of his butt, and I found that to be really weird. The hilarious part about this is the devil creature is played by the writer and producer of the film. So he literally had his cast kiss his ass.
Yeah. Well, and like the demons.
I mean, I'm pretty sure he's wearing a suit, but still.
Well, the most memorable part of this whole film is the witches' Sabbat. You know, where the witches are flying in the air. The devil is. They're dancing with the devil. There's a naked lady. There's just a whole like that is what everybody has seen. And it's really interesting because none of the costumes look like costumes. You can't really tell, and it could be the heavy shadows and stuff, but you couldn't really tell that it was a costume. Like it was...
Right, because it's all black and white.
Yeah. And, they had the, the double exposure witches in the sky, and just the scenery is amazing in this whole episode. This whole part of it. It's just... It's amazing to see what they've done without CGI. I mean, it's all set based. I mean, and that's what's really cool about this movie.
The effects and stuff of it for the time are really good.
Well, even if they did it today, I would use these exact same effects because it would cheapen it. So, I recommend this one. I actually give it a 5 out of 5. And the reason why I do is because it has a huge historical... To me, it's very historical. And if you have an interest in witchcraft, not like witchcraft as practicing, but as in the Inquisition and stuff like that, and how they viewed it, I think this is a really big one. I mean, I know I think Sweden is the only country that still has a witchcraft Inquisition museum where they used all of that. I mean, they're not trying to hide it away from their culture. They're like, yeah, we did this. It was bad. And here's the things that... And I think this movie could be like that sort of like penance for that.
Right.
But at the same point, I think the idea was future generations need to see this so we don't repeat it. And
Right. And that makes total sense. I mean, that's why we need to keep our history at the forefront of our mind, because if we don't, we're doomed to repeat it.
Yeah. So... Now, behind all of this, there's a lot of different theories on what caused the Inquisition. What caused it. And one of them, which one's my favorite one, and I'm no, historian or whatever, but I'm an amateur historian at best. And one theory is that it was all sexual based. All of this was just at this time, the Catholic Church had everybody underneath his control.
Yeah.
And it was so, like, you can only have sex if you're married.
Yeah, it was very powerful.
Well, no, you're talking about a completely celibate society concept. And even if you're married, you couldn't have recreational sex. Everything had to be
For reproductive
purposes only. So, and then you're talking about the priest class, being celibate. So some people think that this whole thing, because if you look at who the victims were mostly women. And they had to strip and be naked. And not to be crude, but a lot of the old torture devices sort of has come into play into modern BDSM culture. And now I don't know if that's a reaction because they brought it in or they modified it. But a lot of people, several historians do think that it was a sexual release for these people.
I don't know. I mean, if you go years telling somebody they can't do something, then people are eventually going to snap and do it anyway. But it's going to go totally up past the line of normal.
Well, I mean, also at this time too, there was, I think, the bubonic plague was happening.
That's not good.
You know, so they're trying to point the finger at somebody, not with their basic understanding on how disease worked and stuff like that. And it was just, it was a culture of fear, and it was a culture of sexual repression, and it just made a really horrible thing where the half of the population of Europe was killed off because of a handful of people.
Unfortunately, stuff like that happens.
Yeah. So what do you rate it as?
I think I'd probably give it a 3 out of 5.
You just felt really bored by it?
I mean, I do find the history fascinating, but the music just made me want to go to sleep.
Well, there's some things that I didn't care for about it was that it seems like the stories were very disjointed.
Yes, I felt the same way.
I mean, I simply think they could have had...
I think it was kind of all over the place. It could have been a little bit better organized. It kind of went down this one path, and then it jumped somewhere else, and it jumped somewhere else, and you were just like, what?
I felt like...
It was hard to follow.
I think scene 7, that's the one I really didn't care for. Out of all of them, that was the one I didn't care for because there was no historical aspect to it. It wasn't trying to... It felt like it was trying to persuade, but at the same point, not. It was trying to, disprove, not persuade. Disprove that the witch hunts shouldn't never happen again. But it was like, but we now have hysteria. We're trying to use a different thing to... We're not killing, we're just locking everybody up that, we think deserves it. And that's where I sort of like, all right, you should have just... I felt like the message should have been, let's never have this happen again in our, in our human history.
Yeah.
It was horrible. What did we learn out of it? Type thing.
Well, okay. That is number 13. We are done.
Yes.
And, yeah, so you guys should watch this, and it's very informative and has a really interesting history. And it's public domain, so you can find it on YouTube very easily.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks you guys.